Good afternoon. How are you? How are you doing, guys? In the audience, let us know how the event is going for you. Let us know all your thoughts, what you've learned so far. We have had a lot of financial topics so far in the conference. Now we stop that part and we have an exciting panel discussion around SSI identity, what blockchain can do about the identity. And for this, we have an amazing set of panelists. So welcome on board, Daniel. The stage is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, or wherever you are in the world. Indeed, a warm welcome to this session on, I think, the next interesting use case next to decentralized finance. The hottest topic in blockchain town is, of course, decentralized identity. Yeah? We're not going to do an introduction course on one-on-one on decentralized identity. The topic has been raised a few times in this interesting conference. I'm happy to have a very strong panel which will discuss the next steps. What is the status of SSI? Where are we? Are we there yet? What is missing? So that will be a bit the topic of today. I will be your moderator. I'm Daniël Seuil, working as a convener for the European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework. I will do the moderation, try to keep your questions in mind, and also I challenge a bit our participants and in our panelists today. So I'm very happy to have that strong panel. And as mentioned, we'll be having a few 4 topics that is now hot topic into the decentralized identity. And of course, as you know, in Europe, it is big time, but not only in Europe, in the global industry, there is a lot of attention on new digital identity. So we have a strong, important momentum to influence, to inspire a new whole set of identity topics. That will, of course, be also the challenge of this panel. So with much, not to stick too much in the introduction and go directly to the panelists, I would like to invite all of them to briefly present themselves, present their expertise, their project, their organization, and then when we will set up, we'll enter into discussion. If you have any questions, please post them in the chats. I will keep an eye on this, and if the momentum is there, I will pick one some up. But of course, with those interesting panelists, maybe we'll stick with all those inside things. No? So I wish you a lot of learnings into this. But first one, Charles, would you present yourself?
Yeah, Daniël, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the conference organizers. Again, I'm Charlie Walton. I'm part of Prague-based Avast. It's a company that's been expert in the cybersecurity arena. I've just recently joined mid 2021 to lead a new business activity within Avast in the field of digital identity and trust services. Ahead of that had been part of MasterCard for the past 4 years, where I had founded the business called ID Services, idservices.com. Historically, I've been involved in the creation and work related to the Trust Over IP Foundation, which is a Linux Foundation project, and I think doing some very good work in the field, and as well involved in the early stages of the Good Health Pass Collaborative, which also I think has done some great work. I'm a real advocate for decentralized identity and what I might call the aspect of this called commercial SSI, of beginning to create commercial viability and real use. Certainly cannot think of a better place for that, and where I think we'll begin to see that founding ground is in Europe with really great work that's gone on to date, and I know will in this coming year. Our company is really as a consumer focused company with nearly 450 million people that use our products today. We're going to be focused on bringing to market, what might be called a digital smart agent, something that's a little bit beyond a wallet, that works on the user's behalf for the user and only under the control of the user to help their digital lives in authentication, in identity, and in other privacy matters, helping to empower and really work for the user. So this is really the focus we're taking. Again, our business is relatively new from mid this year, and we've just completed, in fact, last week, and had announced the acquisition of US-based Evernim, who's been one of the pioneers in the field. So really committed to this area. We're I'm thrilled to be here today. So thank you, Daniel. Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. Joao, up to you.
So good afternoon, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. And also thank you very much for the European Blockchain Convention for the invite. And I find myself in a panel about self-sovereign identity, Daniel. So your turf. So I come from the European Commission. As you might know, I'm working together with Daniel on this very important project called the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure. So we typically call it EBSI. I work with the DG for Informatics, so it's the digital arm of the Commission. I work with the member states, so Daniel represents Belgium, but we have all member states represented in the project. And we have DG Connect, that is the policy owner. And we are all working together to make SSI at least known by more people, and also working within the framework of the several pilots that we currently are undergoing. So we have a pilot on working abroad, because we are the Commission. We like to have cross-border pilots with the DG that takes care of all employment matters, so DG Emploi. We also have a use case on studying abroad, which is about verifiable diplomas and enabling education across Europe, supported by SSI as an option. And I will explain why, because there's a question about will this new model be replacing the so-called old models, or will it coexist with the current models of identification? So I will be talking about that in a few moments.
Okay, perfect, Joao. Thank you very much. And indeed, in Europe is a lot of things happening. So very happy that the Commission is that active with people like you and this. So, okay. Then Jim St. Clair, up to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning. And I want to echo Charlie's comments and our appreciation for organizing this outstanding session, having the chance to be with you this afternoon. My name is Jim St. Clair. I'm the Executive Director of Linux Foundation Public Health. The Linux Foundation is a 20-year-old US-based international association dedicated to membership organized around open source software tools and digital public goods. We have about 5 or 6 organizations or projects within the Linux Foundation that are industry oriented, and I lead our effort around health and digital health technologies and open source ecosystems. Prior to that, I worked with Charlie as part of the Trust Over IP Foundation Steering Committee. Together we've been working on decentralized identity principles, specifications, and standards for almost 2 years together. And in my case, specifically focused on the applications of decentralized identity in healthcare, which both for the US and in Europe means the relationship between a patient, their identity attributes, and their personal health data, and how to enforce proactive and privacy by design principles for patients to manage their health information, how their health information is shared, and their relationship to aspects of their identity, especially when it comes to health equity. I also worked with Charlie on the Good Health Pass, which laid a lot of groundwork concerning the integration and reusability of COVID status, COVID vaccination status into international travel passes for seamless travel. Something that I'm finding, having just left a conference on travel last week, is still very much needed in the industry. But the focus on the ability of the individual to manage their identity, manage their healthcare data and their credentials, and then integrate that into travel passes fits a lot of European regulatory frameworks such as GDPR, the aspects of EIDAS, and other European Commission aspects. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Okay, thank you very much. And last but not least, Hervé.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hervé Bernazzi. I'm the CEO of Archipels. Archipels is the French consortium about self-sovereign identity. We were founded by Caisse des Dépôts, the group La Poste, EDF, and Engie, which are the 2 major energy providers in France. So this consortium is aimed at building a trusted infrastructure for digital identity in France and across Europe. So we are one of those European consortia about identity that believe that blockchain needs to be deployed across Europe to provide identity solutions. I'm very glad to be on this panel. We'll have, I believe, interesting talks about interoperability and what are the main issues for self-sovereign identity. In France, we started with a pragmatic concept. We deployed this permission ledger across our trusted founders, which are major trusted companies in France, to deploy a scalable and GDPR compliant infrastructure to support certification and verification of data. So we deployed early this year a first use case with proof of address from energy bills all across France, and we provide already services to KYC, to banks in France to verify proof of address via self-sovereign identity concepts. Yeah, very glad to be with you tonight, and thank you, Daniel.
Okay, perfect. So I'm very happy that I have a strong panel. So let's challenge them in a moment. So we have a perfect mix about government, private sector, also consortia in this. So those are indeed the players that we see in this area. So let me start after this introduction with the first question and the first topic that we want to raise. And I would like to ask to Joao what his view is on the whole transition model, because we are now introducing a new model in SSI, revolutionary. We are all convinced that, at least in this panel, that is an added value. But how do we deal with all those other legacy identity systems, with all those other building blocks? In the case of CEF, where you're also working, Joao, that are already established, that have been done. How do you see that transition model? No? Will it be a hard transition, a soft one? Give us your opinion on this.
So I think you gave me the hardest question because
sorry, Joao. Yeah.
So I will give my own opinion, as you mentioned, Daniel. It's not policy or something of the Commission. I'm participating as Joao. And as I explained, I come from the digital side of the Commission. So I come from Digit, that we do the implementation side of EBSI. But the policymaker is, of course, the DG Connect. So also the DG responsible for EIDAS. And I don't work for DG Connect. I work with Digit, as you know. What is important to me is to frame this discussion in exactly where we stand today. And the question is about transition, right? So will there be even a transition? So I think that's also a question. Is a transition even needed? And I know I will be eventually a bit conservative in my answer, but let's frame the discussion then. So where do we come from? We come from the traditional siloed identity model, right? So where I am a Portuguese citizen, if I am in Belgium, which I am, and I want to use one of their public services online, I have to have some Belgium EID means, right? And as you know, traditionally in the siloed model, not only I have to have that, but typically you have the different sectors with eventually different EID means. So social security at their own, and then health at their own, and then probably, you would find many others in different member states. So this was the traditional model that started to change with the idea of federating EID means. So that idea was happening both at national level, but also at cross-border level. And this is quite important, of course, because I'm talking from the Commission standpoint. And the idea there is, what if we have a sort of EID gateway or node where upon the choice of the citizen of which EID means he wants to use, I can provide then access to the identity provider, and then that identity provider can send that information to the requester asking for the identification information. So that was the main idea. I mean, can we federate the different identity providers upon this idea of EID gateways or EID nodes? The member states started to work on this since 2008. We should not forget that. So we are talking about work that started in 2008 as part of the STORC large-scale pilot, if you remember well, that then led to STORC 2, and then finally to the legal basis that allowed mutual authentication of EID means across Europe, which is working today, which is known as EIDAS. So that was, I would say, a revolution already at the time, which meant that I could, for the first time, use my Portuguese ID card to access a Belgian service. So I no longer have the silos. I can actually interconnect the different member states, and I can use EID means from one member state in another member state online. So federation, I think, was the idea, and it is still under implementation. So there was no transition from one model to the other. As you know, not all member states have enabled EIDAS, and some of them have partially enabled EIDAS. However, it's already working in most member states and mostly for public services. So it was not an amazing uptake from the private sector. We have to be fair about that. The EIDAS revision is online as well if you want to consult it. But the federated model is a model that has this idea of saying, why don't we interconnect EID gateways with each other and have the identity providers behind and able to exchange information about identity using a common secure protocol. Now, so we went from the traditional siloed model to a federated model that is still being built and being improved. And now emerges, I would say, the self-sovereign model. So what is the self-sovereign model? According to our understanding, of course, is instead of having the identity provider sharing information with the requester for identification, why cannot that be done by the citizen? Why do I need to go through this first step of being redirected to the identity provider that then does the authentication and sends the identity information back to the trusted requester through this protocol? And that idea, I think it's mainly coming out of three technologies. I don't think it's only blockchain. We have the verifiable credentials technology, which is quite important, W3C verifiable credentials. And why is it important? Because unlike common documents, verifiable credentials have this other way of looking at verifiability. So they are very easy to verify and very, very difficult to fake. And that's thanks to the standard of W3C, because typical documents, it's the opposite, right? They're easy to fake and difficult to verify. Here, the thing is turned around, and it uses electronic signatures, of course, to make sure that we can identify the issuer and we can identify the holder. And there's a lot of things that you should know if you are interested to use W3C verifiable credentials, but I will not go into details. Then the second element, of course, is blockchain that makes possible the support of the verification in a sort of real-time way. And we are using blockchain not to store the identity, but to allow the verifier to fetch the public keys necessary for the verification, and also to verify if that identity means, for example, or that identity, verifiable identity has not been revoked, so that you are sure, of course, that when you give access to your service, that that identity was issued by a trusted party, that is held by this person through pseudonym, so through W3C deeds, and we can go then into the technical part, but we don't store personal information on the blockchain, or at least the only personal information that is stored are deeds, and that's the, let's say, the bare minimum that is there, nothing else. Where is the verifiable ID? On the wallet. So you need the three. You need first the W3C verifiable credential, then you need what? You need the blockchain, and you need the wallet. And of course, this has impacts throughout, I would say, the three actors. So it implies impacts on the issuers, that now have to issue something that in the past was not even there, doesn't exist, which is the verifiable credential. It goes through a specific format. We enroll these issuers in a specific way, so it has impact on the issuer. On the holder, because he has to now have a wallet, a smartphone eventually. Not everyone has it. Actually, the penetration rate in Europe is about 75 to 78% as far as I could see. So personally, I've been looking at this figure. So, and then thirdly, of course, the verifier. So the verifiers also will need to have a verification app. We know it's quite easy to, actually the verification should be the easiest because that's the point, but also has an impact there. My conclusion personally is that this is a change of paradigm that requires time because issuers, verifiers, and holders will now find themselves in this journey together, right? And they kind of are interdependent of one another. And therefore, as we saw that the federated model is still being built, I believe that the same will happen with the new model. And it will most likely coexist with the other two models that are still around. So I don't think we can talk about the transition. What we can envisage is, of course, that we together, meaning the ecosystem together, will evolve to make this new paradigm as easy as possible, a commodity, which is still not the case because not everyone knows even where to start when looking for a wallet supporting verifiable IDs, and also accepted by both public entities and private entities. And I think that that's the, let's say, the goal that you wanted to ask as commission. Of course, we are working on that model as part of EBSI with your support and support of several member states, experimenting with it, making it part of our pilots, but we are not only relying on that model. We still support, of course, the federated model, the common EIDAS that has a legal basis and that works well. So
okay.
I hope
Okay, thank you very much, Joao. Indeed, it was a hard question. Sorry for that, but you've managed to do that. So you don't see a real hard transition from one model to another. Hervé, maybe I can put the question to you. How you see those in your ecosystem in France? Do we have also the same opinion, or do we see it differently, that transition model?
Yeah. The challenge, in fact, is the adoption of the technology. To drive mass adoption, we need to have something intuitive, easy to use, and the experience for the user is key. So, of course, wallets and blockchain technology can be a bit rude for the beginning, but the challenge is to make it very easy to use. And I believe the adoption will come from the benefits for the users. Having a passwordless experience on the internet is really a step forward that will drive user adoption. So in France, we need to say that France has been late in digital identity, but a lot of new initiatives are coming. La Poste is deploying a digital identity for all citizens, and it allows to log in many services. In France, you have a federated model with France Connect, which has a tremendous success with 30 million users that use this way of connecting to various public services, all administration, but also private services now. What we want to bring with Archipels is more usage. Your core identity is something which is useful for many use cases, but it's not enough. So what self-sovereign identity brings is verifiable credentials, which are not only identity as your civil names, etc., which are various credentials, multiple credentials that will drive adoption and drive use cases. So we believe that adoption will come in vertical industries by use cases with each credential which is needed for this use case. that's why we started with the proof of address at Archipels, because it's needed in many use cases. In fact, alongside your names and proof of identity, to open a bank account, to play online, you need to prove that you're French resident in official gaming systems in France. So all those kind of use case comes from the use case, what we need for this use case, what kind of credentials do we need, and how do we empower users and how do we simplify the user experience for this particular use case. That's why it will take time, in fact, to change each industry, because it will need a very deep digital transformation in the systems of the banks, of the major online platforms, to accept and enable this new kind of credentials. So it will take some time, but hopefully we'll see it in a few years. And the other thing that is really important to deal with is governance. All the benefits of self-sovereign identity is about the decentralization. It's about the governance of the identity systems. So and to enable all those use cases, you have to have a governance between public sector and private sector, because private sector will take a big part of it, issuing credentials and receiving credentials. And so you have to mix all those actors into a transparent and public governance. That's what we are trying to do in France. That's what is done also on the European level, and I believe that the next objective is to have a framework across the world to govern all those identity systems. But
we'll come back in a moment.
Yeah.
We'll come back in a moment in that. So keep that in mind. Then you have also said something important, of course, and also Joao. He mentioned, okay, it will not be a hard transition. Will be both having. You, on the other hand, mentioned also, there will be, of course, a deep transition, so costing money and trying to have implement. So a question to you, Charles, and that is also towards the next question. What kind of business model could support this SSI? We all seem to convince this is an opportunity, but how do you see this? What kind of role or incentive do public sector needs to play in this? And what kind of private sector initiatives that need to be done, and what kind of business models are behind it to make it sustainable? What's your opinion on this, Charles? You're still muted.
Very sorry. Hoy and Hervé had begun to touch on this point, and it's a really important one. And I'd say government, the commission, and member states clearly have a very, very important role to play. But I think the comment made that the private sector is as well important when we think about use cases and verifier adoption, and as well issuer participation. Certainly in a very rich self-sovereign infrastructure, we have private sector issuance that has to occur as well. My role in a membership organization, my certification as a pilot or as a doctor, my university degree, and so on. So there's much that government can do by way of issuing, and there's much that private sector can do as issuing. We've then got government adoption and private sector adoption, as we've pointed out. Now, the real question is, how do they begin to come together? And surely, I think one of the big advantages, if the right balance can be gotten within private sector, is that private sector can invest, and this will be a cost to set up a very vibrant infrastructure to achieve the vision that many of us have seen. That is a digital identity wallet or an agent that works for me, that's under my control, and allows me to deal with many of the things that I deal with every day, every week, in a verifiable fashion. So I think to the extent that private sector can be provided with the right frame and the guidance, fundamentally the spirit and the standards to implement, that can work really, really well. Now, maybe I'll shift gears a little bit, and I think Hervé was speaking to governance, which I think is exceptionally important. And when we rewind back several years ago, we all heard and talked about this idea of issuers issuing verifiable credentials and holders holding them and then using them with verifiers, and it was all going to work just fine. The practical reality is, how do you get to that state? And I'm not of a belief that can just happen naturally by issuers and verifiers deciding, right? There's a market making function. There's a hand, there's an involvement that needs to occur. So that's kind of one. If we begin to think about this evolution from self-sovereign identity to maybe what I term commercial self-sovereign identity, right? There's an entity involved or entities involved to create this hand of market making. There's then a rule set around, well, how might you monetize? For sure, verifiers are gaining economic benefit today through identity data of vetting, Jim or Hervé in opening a new bank account or creating a new insurance arrangement or so on. So there are certain types of transactions for which monetization can occur. And so that's important to recognize and having the mechanism in place to do that. And then I would say that whilst this technology is going down a track of integrity and so on, problems could happen. How do you manage disputes and issues associated with it? And then lastly, as Joao described, we're not going to have a revolutionary shift where everything is turned off and all of a sudden the world will be wired to this really important new key paradigm. It's going to be an evolution. And so how do you manage the technology evolution in a manner that abstracts it, frankly, from the user? Right? The user shouldn't see this. They should see the benefit of a wallet, of an agent that serves them. But we may have issuers that are verifiable credential SSI issuers meeting the standards, and others that may not. We may find traditional IDPs that are participating into old tech standards, but that over the fullness of time are evolving in. So what I bring to bear is this idea of an entity, not a transactional entity, but an entity that might set rules and framework, governance, and deal with these commercial SSI matters. That type of role has been work going on within the Trust over IP Foundation at what's called level 4. I think there are some very good learnings there with that respect. I'd say also, and Jim can probably talk to this even further, but within the development of the Good Health Pass collaborative blueprint, work done as well in thinking about how do we certify an issuer for a credential health pass? How do we certify that? How do we begin mapping policy? How do we begin bringing the community all together? And I think this notion of a governance authority can begin to meet or implement many of the almost reg tech oriented functions that have to occur to set the table, really to set the table and to get the market going. So Daniël, that might be my view, and I think the thing that likely needs to be developed or worked on collaboratively are how can the involvement of the Commission, member state governments, and then private sector, how can those partnerships be set so that we've got all the spirit, all the drive within the Commission for the good of the European community in ways that don't take advantage of people with their data and provide an economically appropriate, right, economically appropriate environment. How can that partnership be set to get the best of government and the best of private sector, where private sector will naturally want to invest if there's an ability to see funds revenue flowing? So
Perfect. Indeed, and I will use indeed your assist to Jim, because I think within indeed what you mentioned, the health aspect, how you see this evolving, Jim? What kind of view do you have on the business model supporting that health credentials?
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel. And I think my colleagues have covered a lot of the aspects of legacy versus transition very well, especially Charlie's comments on governance. I'd add one thing that we look at quite a bit that we haven't mentioned so far is the issue of socio-cultural trust. And that is just cultures building trust amongst themselves, the culture of healthcare delivery, for instance, whether in US or Europe, just the traditional relationship that you have with your physician, with your provider. Many times the tendency is that your doctor knows best and needs to know all of your information in order to make assessments or to provide diagnosis of a problem. And how does that model start to change when the individual is empowered using regulations we already have at GDPR, HIPAA, or others to say, well, I'm here to see you about this issue, and I don't think you need to know more about me than this issue. And this is especially sensitive when there's issues of gender identification, gender equality, freedom not to disclose certain aspects of what you consider to be personal about your identity, but they can influence how you receive medical care. And at the end of the day, being able to manage that identity and consent for that data to say, I'll share it with you, but I don't want it to go anywhere else without someone else knowing. In the US in coordinated care processes, there might be information moved all around that you're not even aware of, and trying to change that model, means putting in these sorts of components. And I think going back to this discussion about transition from legacy or federated systems to self-sovereign identity, there's probably lots of agreement where components of legacy systems have continued to work well, and they still meet the requirements for identity management, for access management, and will remain in place. But then as we adopt new concepts of governance and new concepts of trust frameworks, then we would implement or overlay aspects of self-sovereign identity into that to better empower people for how their data is managed, how their identity is managed, and how that changes a business process. Charlie mentioned about the Good Health Pass, and a challenge that's going on right now within health passes as they exist is that we literally have travelers who are showing up at a border control point at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, only to find that this particular piece of paper they've been issued around their credentials and their information isn't valid for where they're at. That isn't necessarily the responsibility of the individual. That is the responsibility of one border agency in conjunction with one health organization, trusting what another border agency or health organization has said. And that goes back to governance and simple agreements around that trust framework for how organizations work together. That pertains the same between hospitals and providers. It certainly pertains to governments and commercial organizations. And sometimes just getting that simple framework of agreement, that trust framework, can be the most challenging parts of the process, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. And you indeed touched a very interesting point, and bringing us to the next topic. Indeed, you have that governance model. In Europe, we try to do that together with EPSI, with all the partners. But maybe, Hervé, what is your view on the more global governance that needs to work with it? That Jim can also come to Belgium and share credentials. How do you see this, Hervé, on interoperability or international governance aspects, and how to solve those kind of things?
Yeah, that's the main question and the main issue. So that's a difficult topic. Well, in Europe, EDAS 2 will force interoperability, and that's great, because we see that now with the common toolbox to build EDAS 2, and Joao could talk about that probably in more details. You have working groups all across Europe with people from each member state working together to define governance, to define technical specifications, and to define the legal framework of the future regulation. So this is a way to build together and to ensure interoperability across member states and across systems, because we'll still have a siloed system in each member state, even if a common standard and technology standards will be adapted. So, but we'll have to build a framework to make a system trusted from the other system. So that's where it has come and solved the problem. But it's a European framework, so the difficulty will be across all over the world. So we at Archipels we participated in many workshops with Canada, for example, with the DG Connect initiative, discussion between Europe and Canada on self-sovereign identity framework. All of this shows that we are all building first on the same technological standards. So thanks to W3C, now we have global technical specification and recommendation to adopt. And since the adoption of the recommendation for verifiable credential and for DIDs, we see all over the world initiative that deploy this technology. So this is a first step, as verifiable credential will be understandable by all systems, but then you have to build the trust framework and to make all issuers. I mean, how do you ensure that this issuer have the right to issue and that it can be recognized by this other part of the world? That's the whole problem. And here I believe that blockchain can help in this manner, because it has the ability to build a global system with this kind of ledger to ensure all participants are well identified. I mean, issuers and every system. So the blockchain here can bring trust across peoples, and like in other use case for blockchains, technology is now mature to have a cross blockchain interoperability. So I believe that self-sovereign identity will use the same mechanism to ensure interoperability across system, which will be a kind of technically it's the same as interoperability across blockchains. So that's the way, but
okay.
But yeah, that's a difficult topic.
Sorry, I'm only asking a difficult question. I'm very happy to learn also from US, or I'm using this for my personal gain. Sorry for that. But indeed, Hervé, you mentioned the interoperability between member states, within also with continent. Joao, if I can ask you also, because we had some interoperability nightmares or challenges between all those kind of things. What is your view on this?
Well, it's nothing new. I mean, I don't think that this specific standard is more challenging than the others. It's not because two projects use W3C verifiable credentials that they will be interoperable, and we know about that. So the spec, for example, that was mentioned here, the Good Healthcare Pass makes some choices on the way that they implement the W3C verifiable credentials that are different from several other projects that are also using W3C verifiable credentials. We are currently in EBSI having our own, what we call a playbook. So we have made the necessary choices for wallet providers to implement W3C verifiable credentials, OpenID Connect, because we don't talk about that, but there's also the exchange protocol between the verifiers and the issuers. There are many cryptographic decisions to be made. So it's not easy to even think about interoperability at European level. When we scale that up to global level, it's even harder. And blockchain will not be the only element, because there are many choices inside of the W3C verifiable credentials. And then there are many protocols that are supposed to be used by the wallets to exchange with issuers and exchange with verifiers. And we know that there are several initiatives competing and evolving, and more will come. So definitely a challenge. And we know that with federated systems, it was exactly the same. We had many protocols that promised to be secure, that were implemented by different regions, but not by others. So we will continue to have a lot of fragmentation, in my opinion, which is normal. But I think things will probably stabilize as we start to have mass adoption. And that probably will take some time, but I think only then we will have some sort of de facto way of implementing double-traced verifiable credentials, which is widely accepted as being, the most accepted way by most wallets. And indeed, the wallets, in my opinion, are the ones that eventually are currently scratching their heads, because if they have, 5 projects to which they can eventually try to be conformance tested again. So EBSI provides a conformance testing service. So if you are a wallet, you can prove that you support double-traced verifiable credentials according to our playbook. You can also prove that you interpret well the exchange with issuers and with verifiers. But eventually, a wallet might have 5, 6 other projects that have, different choices. So of course, that is always a challenge, and we understand that. And this is why we want to work as the European Union, as all member states, to try to assemble as many use cases and as many, let's say, needs as possible, and lower the burden on the ones that are currently doing the work on the wallet.
On that use cases, we have also, I want to pick up a question from the chat. Somebody is also asking, will we having solutions, wallet solutions, or even broader SSI agreements, domain specific, or do you see that, okay, I have an educational wallet, I have my business wallet, a bank account wallet? How do you see this, Joao?
I can only talk about EBSI. So in EBSI, we don't include any of the two. So you can have, so we have education-specific wallets being conformance tested, and then we have wallets that are supposed to be, let's say, usable by every use case. We don't have a preference, and I don't think that there is an absolute answer to that. I mean, is it one better than the other? Can one be avoided? I mean, I don't think that is like the way that the market will go, right? I mean, it's more.
Charles, maybe your opinion on this? How you see this?
I completely agree with Oe that this is going to be market-driven, market force, and we're going to see multiple answers. Ultimately, users may choose to say, well, gee, I'd like to keep my healthcare data over here with my healthcare provider, and all of my e-commerce or other merchant-related stuff over here, or a traveler may choose a certain way, and then you may have other behaviors that say, I'd like to organize my digital life around a broader structure. So this is also, Daniel, where I think the private sector can bring some innovation, can bring other value adds to people that may give a richer environment in a vertical, or may give a broader environment. But I don't think there ought to be prescription, and I think it's very difficult to predict that this is going to happen over a number of years for sure.
Okay, and then is, I think, a perfect bridge to the last question, and the most difficult one. Sorry, I keep the last question difficult one. It's about privacy, of course. Many advantages that we give on SSI are indeed, okay, we're going to empower the citizens. He will be having more control of his data. Implicitly, we argue that it will be having more privacy. But will that be the case? Will technology alone enforce that? So I would like to hear your opinion, Jim. You are indeed on a very sensitive topic about health data. Do the technology protect itself, or do we need a bit more harsh rules? You know that we like to regulate things in Europe. So do we need even harder things than what is currently doing? So what's your opinion, Jim?
Sure, great question, Daniel. And I think coming from the healthcare perspective in particular, and the concepts of new technology, I think the challenge we have is how much privacy do we think that we should have, we want, and that's regardless of whether it's a European regulatory framework or the US. Certainly I know with Charlie's background and myself, both of us encounter more and more that artificial intelligence, machine learning has the capability to compile data sets and provide analytics that regardless of individual structures around privacy or regulations around protecting elements of information, are getting recompiled, reanalyzed, and what we call re-identified. So even if I have healthcare information that my personal name and information has been, identifying information has been taken out, there are processes to use AI and ML to be able to recompose those, as well as just the collection of information that your phone and your mobile device provide, that your computer provides, that your internet connection provides, and how those are being collected and potentially analyzed. Where do we see as cultures, as countries, as societies, breakpoints in privacy that we need to take into account? And are there ways that we now introduce these principles of self-sovereign identity as part of privacy that aren't just a matter of providing more privacy than before, but in some cases trying to at least maintain a status quo for privacy, given new surveillance and data science techniques that are compiling more information about the individual than ever before. From a healthcare perspective, where we have a challenge is that we feel that there are those folks that have behavioral health difficulties or elderly population and the others, and to an extent, those still require surveillance. We consider ethically that to protect those people, they need to be they need to have adequate coverage of what they're doing and what their identity is in order to give them care, because they need to be taken care of just like children. But at other levels of adult populations, how do we manage that information, and how do we empower those individuals to opt out of that information so they're not under that same sort of surveillance structure? And then, of course, there's the commercial implications in between. So it's as much a fight to keep privacy as we understand it or as we desire it now, as it is to try and add any new privacy going forward to the future, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe, Charles, I would like, Avast is, of course, a company securing R and also reflecting. Is there also a market for wallets that would provide us more privacy or not go into aspects? Or are you thinking in that kind of direction? Or what type of consumer thing is privacy an issue or a topic in that product launch or creation?
So, I would say, and again, our thinking around this is that, a digital smart agent becomes the user tool, the consumer tool, and that reflects aspects of digital identity wallets, as we've talked about today, helps me with authentication into traditional manners, but importantly becomes the agent that helps me with my privacy. We're of the belief that this is an incredibly important area. The user just doesn't have tools on their side. Digital businesses have got data analytics, a lot of data collection, and so on, and the user has very, very few tools to help them interrogate the privacy policy of a digital destination and help to interpret what that means. The user really should be in the control of their data, and increasingly, as the world begins going more to decentralization, not just with identity, but with data services, we begin to see transactional services that require less data to be held by digital businesses. So to the extent, Daniel, if you and I had an exchange, I as a consumer and you in a business, and I was able to bring my own account, all right? The notion of bring my own account when I transact with you, that also is good for you in that it helps you become more compliant with really good regs like GDPR, meeting more of the spirit, and it also lessens your cybersecurity risk profile. And let's have to keep in mind that organizations that are holding lots and lots and lots of data almost have to be thinking about that as a bit of a toxic asset, that will ultimately bite them. They'll get attacked. And so to the extent that they've got less data, and we've got a frame where the user's empowered with tools to bring their own account data when they come in, we've got a better deal, not just for people, but also for businesses. And so this notion of a shift to more decentralized application services is actually really, really key to privacy as well. So we think tools for people are critical. And, you look at the numbers around the globe, identity theft, it's growing. card not present fraud, it's growing. The extent of the devices I have, the device I've managed, that I'm managing, the data and the account relations, that stuff's all growing. So the complexity and what's at stake here is only growing. And with a decentralized identity and decentralized services, we can begin taking some of that back, get a little bit better control of our data privacy. And it's, in my view, absolutely critical. It's a big driver to how I'm thinking about our business at Avast.
Okay, perfect. Hervé, I don't know if we have a different view from in Europe in this, or do you share indeed? Yeah.
No, I completely agree with Charles. Yeah, I believe privacy is needed, and we need to force this with technology, with zero knowledge proof technology, for example, because SSI could be used as a tool of surveillance if not well implemented and well designed, and we really need to ensure with technology and with the legal and governance framework that we'll do it right. We'll do it right for the citizens. So I completely agree, Charles. We lost Daniel.
We became a self-sovereign panel.
Yeah, because he's in the dark. Yeah.
Sorry, I needed to switch the power on. Sorry for this. Indeed. Oh, we have 3 minutes left. As somebody in the chat always mentioned, yeah, this is when privacy comments, we tend to be in a philosophical debate, but indeed it is more than technology. It's more than the aspects. We need to see how we see society in this and how we empower those aspects. I would like to close this session because we are almost running out of time. With your maybe best wishes for 2022. So Charles, Joao, Jim, and Hervé, what do you see in the next year as an important evolution? So Charles, maybe up to you. So briefly, 1 minute, your prediction.
Daniel, I think we've been in a mode where we've been experimenting and looking at decentralized techniques. The standards are coming to bear, and I think we're at a moment right now going into 2022 to start serving users well with the technology. I think this is the year for real use cases and real utility.
Okay, perfect. Joao, what's your view on 2022
well,
for SSI?
Yes, my wish is that all the pilots that are ongoing on the European blockchain services infrastructure, EBSI, give, let's say, enough results for people to become really interested to look into everything that we are doing since 2018, and that, of course, we will have more pilots and more involvement of this great ecosystem.
Perfect. Hervé, your wishes?
Yeah, well, my wishes is that in 2022 we will deploy major pilots in France across self-sovereign identity, and mainly that EIDAS2 will come up with a great solution for Europe. This is the phenomenal initiative from the European Commission to deploy at the European level this kind of concept. And I wish that it will become true in 2022.
Okay, perfect. And Jim, to close it?
Yeah, I would just echo Hervé's comments with regards to EIDAS2 in Europe, and at the same time, the advancements of the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, the government of the province of Ontario's Trust Framework and digital identity work, the British Columbia, the New Zealand Trust Framework, and New South Wales and Australia implementing a new strategy for consumer-centric identity services. I think the core tenets that we've talked about in terms of governance and architecture and trust frameworks are embodied in all of those. So to see, several countries at once moving in that direction shows that we may have some good momentum going through 2022 and certainly into 2023.
Okay, so that's promising on the global side. So let's stick together. Let's meet each other in next year, hopefully in the next European Blockchain Convention, to see where we are and we have finally landed. So thank you very much, Hervé, Charles, and Joao, and Jim for this great conversation. And I learned a lot, and hopefully the audience also had some interesting insights to be shared by international experts in this. To you, Daniël.
Thank you very much to all panelists. Thank you for this update on SSI. It looks like 2022 will be a busy year on identity. So thank you once again for finding time and being with us. And I invite the audience to stay for a few more sessions. We have 3 sessions still of the second day. And I'll see you in the chat. So thank you.
Bye.
Bye.